Ladies and gentlemen, Archivist here. We have spent the last 10 days documenting the accelerating financial disintegration of the Western Alliance. But on January 19th, 2026, the war went kinetic. It moved from the balance sheet to the ocean floor. It moved from the theoretical realm of finance to the physical realm of critical infrastructure. In a press briefing that was notably sparse on details, but heavy on suppressed panic, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte confirmed that Allied naval forces are currently tracking 2 Russian research vessels, operating aggressively erratically and with clear hostile intent in the Atlantic and Baltic seas. The vessels identified are the Yantar and the Admiral Vladimirsky. The mainstream media, in its infinite capacity for understating existential threats to keep the public calm, referred to this activity as spying. They showed stock footage of gray ships on gray water and talked about intelligence gathering or mapping. Let me be absolutely, unequivocally clear. This is not about spying. Spying is passive. Spying is listening. Spying is placing a tap on a cable to read the emails of a diplomat in Brussels or listen to the phone calls of a general in the Pentagon. Spying requires stealth. It requires you to be unnoticed. What the Yantar and the Vladimirsky are doing is not listening. They are mapping for demolition. They are conducting the final surveys for a kinetic strike. Forensic tracking data cross-referenced with commercial maritime AIS logs and leaked naval intelligence reports reveals that the Yantar, officially designated as an oceanographic research vessel, but effectively a mothership for deep-sea sabotage, has been loitering directly over the Hibernia Express and the Apollo cable systems in the North Atlantic. These are not random cables chosen by chance. These are the specific low-latency arteries that connect the New York Stock Exchange to the London Stock Exchange. They are the physical manifestation of the global financial system. The Yantar is not just a ship. It is a mobile base for underwater warfare. It is equipped with 2 manned submersibles, the Rus and the Consul, capable of diving to depths of 6,000 meters, 20,000 feet. These are not scientific curiosities. They are military assets. These subs have manipulator arms. They can cut, they can place charges, they can tamper with repeaters. More alarmingly, the Yantar carries unidentified autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, drones that can be deployed to the seabed and left behind, sleeping until they are activated by a sonar signal. The ship has been observed maneuvering in a mowing the lawn pattern, back and forth, methodically scanning the seabed, directly over the cable routes in the path known as the Atlantic Gateway. This is the precise location where the cables serve as the spinal cord of the Western economy. Simultaneously, a second theater of operation has opened. The Admiral Vladimirsky was spotted in the Baltic Sea, operating with its AIS, Automatic Identification System. Transponder turned off, a tactic known as going dark, directly over the Baltic pipe energy infrastructure and the data cables linking Finland to Germany. This is not a coincidence. This is a coordinated dual theater signal. Russia is demonstrating a specific capability, the kill switch. They are proving to the Pentagon, to Brussels, and to the financial masters of the universe in London and New York that they have the ability to sever the connection between the United States and Europe in less than 30 minutes. This is the Atlantic Severance. Why does this matter so much? Why is this the most dangerous news of 2026? Because the internet is not a cloud. It is not magic. It is not a satellite beam coming from space. It is a series of glass tubes, no thicker than a garden hose, laying unprotected on the mud of the ocean floor. There are approximately 400 active subsea cables in the world. They carry 99% of all international data traffic. Satellites, including Starlink, carry less than 1%. They simply do not have the bandwidth to run the global economy. If you cut the glass tubes, the continents go dark. The brain, New York, is severed from the body, Europe. NATO knows this vulnerability intimately. In 2024, Admiral Didier Malater publicly warned that the security of nearly 1 billion civilians rests on infrastructure that is extremely vulnerable. He stated that the Russians have developed specific capabilities to target these lines. Now, in 2026, Russia has parked its knife directly over the jugular vein of the West. The timing is not accidental. It is surgically precise. This provocation comes exactly as the silent sale of U.S. bonds by Europe is executing, requiring massive data flows to settle trades. It comes exactly as the Greenland ultimatum has strained U.S.-Europe relations to the breaking point. Russia is saying, "You are fighting over money and territory. We can turn off the lights. We can delete the ledger." This creates a psychological terror that no interest rate hike can fix. It introduces a non-zero probability of total disconnectivity. For a financial system built on microseconds, algorithmic trading, and instant settlement, a disconnect is indistinguishable from death. The market cannot price in a scenario where the market itself ceases to exist. The Yantar is not there to look for fish. It is there to remind the West that its entire digital civilization hangs by a thread. a thread made of silica, wrapped in plastic, lying in the dark. To understand why Russia would risk open war by targeting civilian infrastructure, an act that could be construed as an Article 5 violation under NATO treaties, you have to understand the Gerasimov doctrine and the Russian military concept of information blindness. General Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces and the architect of modern Russian hybrid warfare, posits that the lines between war and peace are blurred. He argues that the primary objective in modern conflict is not necessarily to conquer territory with tanks, but to deny the enemy the ability to coordinate. The kill switch is the ultimate expression of this doctrine. It is an asymmetric nuclear weapon. Russia knows it cannot defeat NATO in a conventional naval battle. The U.S. Navy carrier groups are too large, too advanced, and too numerous. In a ship-to-ship fight, the Russian Navy loses. But Russia also knows that the Western economy is fragile, hyper-connected, and totally dependent on real-time data flow. The Western economy is a just-in-time organism. It relies on the seamless transmission of orders, payments, and intelligence. The Russian economy, by contrast, is not. It has been sanctioned into autarky. It is built on commodities, cash, physical gold, and internal rail lines. It is a just-in-case economy. If the internet goes down globally, Russia sells oil for physical gold. They have the oil. They have the gold. Their economy functions on 19th century principles if necessary. If the internet goes down globally, the United States cannot process a credit card transaction. It cannot settle a stock trade. It cannot coordinate a logistics chain. The U.S. economy halts. This asymmetry gives Moscow massive leverage. It turns their backwardness into a strategic advantage. The strategy here is escalate to de-escalate. By threatening the cables, Russia is creating a shadow blockade. They are telling Washington, if you escalate sanctions, or if you intervene in our sphere of influence, or if you push too hard on the Greenland issue, we will cut the cord. But there is a more tactical, immediate reason for this specific timing on January 19th, 2026. Recall the the silent sale of $12 trillion in U.S. assets by European banks that we documented in the previous dossier. Europe is trying to exit the U.S. dollar system. They are unwinding massive derivative positions. To execute that sale, to unwind those massive, complex derivative books, European banks need to communicate with New York clearinghouses. They need to send SWIFT messages. They need to access the DTCC, Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation database in the U.S. All of that traffic, the trillions of dollars of settlement instructions, goes through the Atlantic cables. If Russia cuts the cables during the unwind, the capital gets trapped. The silent sale becomes a frozen sale. Trillions of dollars of liquidity would be stuck in limbo, neither in Europe nor in the U.S. The trades would fail to settle. This would trigger a global margin call of infinite size. Banks on both sides of the Atlantic would be insolvent instantly because they wouldn't know who owns what. Russia is holding the exit door hostage. They are effectively saying to Europe, you want to leave the dollar system? You can only leave if we let the messages through. If you cross us, we trap your money in the dark. Furthermore, this exposes the vulnerability of the Greenland gap. The U.S. wants Greenland to secure resources, zinc, lead, rare earths. But to get to Greenland and to project power into the Arctic, the U.S. Navy has to pass through the GI Yoke Gap, Greenland, Iceland, UK. This is exactly where the cables lie. By operating in this zone, Russia is turning the GI Yoke Gap into a kill zone for data. It forces the U.S. Navy to divert massive resources to protect 40,000 miles of cable. This is a mission that is mathematically impossible. You cannot guard a line that stretches across an entire ocean. You cannot have a destroyer every 10 miles. The Yantar can drop a deep-sea drone with a timed explosive charge, sail away, and be 500 miles gone before the charge detonates weeks later. Attribution becomes difficult. Russia can claim it was an accident or seismic activity or unknown actors or imply that the U.S. did it themselves, a false flag. We saw this playbook with the Nord Stream pipeline. We saw it with the Baltic Connector pipeline. The precedent is set. Infrastructure is fair game in the gray zone. The kill switch is not just a threat, it is a shaping operation. It forces the West to negotiate on Russian terms because the alternative, digital darkness, is economically unsurvivable. NATO is terrified because they know they have no defense against a pair of wire cutters in the dark depths of the Atlantic. Let's perform a rigorous simulation. Let's play out the scenario. What actually happens if the Yantar cuts the Apollo and Hibernia cables tomorrow morning at 0900 Eastern Standard Time? The media will tell you. Netflix will buffer. Email will be slow. You might have trouble loading a website. That is the civilian view. It is dangerously criminally naive. It assumes the internet is just for entertainment and communication. The institutional reality is a total systemic cardiac arrest. 1. The death of high-frequency trading, HHFT. Modern financial markets run on arbitrage. Algorithms buy a stock in London and sell it in New York milliseconds later to capture a $0.0001 price difference. This latency arbitrage provides the liquidity for the global market. It makes sure prices are the same everywhere. It relies entirely on the speed of light through fiber optic cables. The Hibernia Express was built specifically to shave 5 milliseconds off the round-trip time. If the cables are cut, the latency jumps from 60 milliseconds to infinity. Or if traffic is rerouted via satellite, it jumps to 500 or 600 milliseconds. For an HFT algorithm, 500 milliseconds is an eternity. It is the Jurassic period. The HFT bots will instantly turn off. They are programmed with hard stops. If latency exceeds a certain threshold, they pull their quotes. They go offline to prevent losses. When the HFTs turn off, liquidity vanishes. The bid-ask spread on the S&P 500 would blow out from 1 cent to $10. You wouldn't be able to sell your stock because there would be no machine on the other side to buy it. The market would enter a permanent flash crash. Prices would gap down violently, not because of value, but because of a vacuum of buyers. 2. The SWIFT blackout, $10 trillion daily. SWIFT is the messaging system for global banking. It sends payment instructions between banks. Roughly $10 trillion moves through SWIFT every single day. 3. The cloud collapse, AWS, Azure partition. The modern internet is built on availability zones and data replication. Amazon Web Services, AWS, and Microsoft Azure replicate data across continents to ensure safety. If a server burns down in Virginia, the data is safe in Ireland. But this replication relies on constant high bandwidth connection. If the Atlantic link is severed, the US and European data centers become partitioned. They become two separate islands of data that cannot speak to each other. Databases lose concurrency. If a multinational corporation updates a record in London, it doesn't update in New York. Suddenly, you have two versions of the truth. This breaks enterprise software. It breaks banking ledgers. It breaks global logistics tracking. It breaks the blockchain. If the internet partitions, Bitcoin nodes in the US can't talk to Bitcoin nodes in Europe or Asia. The blockchain creates a fork. You could spend the same Bitcoin in New York and in London simultaneously. A double spend attack because the ledgers can't reconcile. The consensus mechanism fails. The value of crypto assets would likely crash to zero or freeze entirely until connectivity is restored. The immutable ledger becomes mutable. 4. The no-bid disaster. Amplified. Recall the $312 billion sell-off we discussed yesterday. If the cables are cut, the U.S. Treasury cannot even hold an auction. Foreign bidders in Europe and Asia cannot submit their bids securely to the Fed's auction system. The U.S. government would be physically unable to borrow money from international lenders. The Federal Reserve would have to print 100% of the daily operating budget of the U.S. government immediately. They would have to monetize the entire deficit instantly because the bond market mechanism is broken. This is the hyperinflationary event triggered not by bad policy, but by physics. The mild economic blackout is why the NATO confirmation on January 19th is the most dangerous news of the year. It confirms that the gun is loaded, cocked and pointed at the server room of Western civilization. The West has built a glass house. Russia is holding a bag of rocks, the Atlantic Severance. Threat forces us to completely rethink what safety means in the digital age. We have been trained to believe that digital is safe, that the cloud is eternal, that Bitcoin is indestructible. But digital assets are only assets if the lights are on and the cables are intact. In a kill switch scenario, your Bitcoin wallet, your online brokerage account, and your digital bank balance are inaccessible. They are theoretical numbers on a server you cannot reach. They are ghosts. So, how do you position yourself for a potential internet kill switch? How do you survive when the connection dies? You follow the archivist's protocol. Protocol. Rule 1. The analog. Hedge. You must have a significant portion of your wealth in analog form. This means physical cash, small denominations, and physical gold, silver in your immediate possession. If the credit card networks go down, Visa or MasterCard rely on these transatlantic cables for verification and fraud detection. You cannot buy gas or food with plastic. The point-of-sale terminals will time out. Cash becomes king for the first 72 to 96 hours. It is the only peer-to-peer payment system that works without electricity or data. Gold and silver become the only currency for larger transactions or wealth preservation if the outage lasts weeks. Do not rely on a gold ETF. If the internet is down, you cannot sell the ETF. You cannot prove you own it. The database that says you own GLD shares is partitioned. Possession is 10/10 of the law in a blackout. If you can't hold it, you don't own it. Protocol Rule 2. Data sovereignty, local storage. We live in the cloud. We stream our music. We store our photos on iCloud. We keep our business documents on Google Drive. If the cables are cut, the cloud evaporates or becomes inaccessible due to bandwidth congestion. You need to download your critical life data. Bank statements, proof of what you owned before the lights went out. Property deeds, proof of land ownership, identification documents, passports, birth certificates, survival manuals or maps. Knowledge that you currently Google, store them on an encrypted hard drive, SSD. Ideally, keep this drive in a Faraday bag to protect against EMPs, which often accompany kinetic sabotage scenarios. This is your digital ark. If the banks lose their ledgers or can't access them, you have the paper trail to prove what you own. You become your own record keeper. Protocol. Rule 3. Alternative comms. If the internet backbone snaps, WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram die. They rely on centralized servers that may be unreachable. How do you communicate with family? Satellite internet. Starlink is a partial solution. It bypasses the cables. But remember, Starlink ground stations rely on fiber backhaul to connect to the rest of the internet. It is not immune, but it is more resilient than a cable. It connects you to something, even if that something is a partitioned internet. Mesh networks. Download apps like BridgeFi or purchase devices like Meshtastic or LoRa. These allow phones to talk to each other directly via Bluetooth or radio frequencies without a central server or cell tower. You can build a local mesh network with your community to send text messages. Ham radio, the ultimate fallback. Analog radio waves do not need fiber optic cables. They bounce off the ionosphere. A shortwave radio allows you to receive news from other continents when the internet is silent. It is the only way to get global intelligence in a blackout. Protocol. Rule 4. Decentralize your assets. Do not have all your assets in one jurisdiction. If the US is cut off from Europe and your money is in a Swiss bank, you cannot access it from New York. The authentication request will time out. You need geographic redundancy. Keep some assets in the US, if you are there, some in Europe, if possible, and some in a neutral zone, like Singapore. But most importantly, keep the keys to your assets yourself, self-custody. If you hold crypto, it must be on a hardware wallet, cold storage. Even if the network partitions, your private keys are safe on the device. When the network reconnects, weeks or months later, your coins will still be there on the blockchain. If they are on an exchange, Coinbase, Binance, they might be gone, frozen or rehypothecated during the chaos. The exchange might fail. Your hardware wallet will not. The Atlantic Severance is the ultimate